Tonight's gathering is an opportunity for all of us to practice some key leadership skills are essential for these times, for the work that we are doing together. What are we for? What are we about? Is what we'll be talking about. So we're going to ask you to lean in to these skills in your interactions with each other this evening and actually practice what we're talking about, how to be in covenant. And so we've got some group norms that we suggest to you, which Chanel is going to put in the chat for you to be thinking of as we do this work together. Take care of yourself. Extend grace as others do the same. Share by choice. It's okay to pass or pause. Share the time. Speak from your own experience. Expect multiple perspectives. Pause for repair as needed. Make room for joy and laughter and curiosity and growth and sadness and silence. Being fully human is an act of resistance and an act of faith. And honor confidentiality, particularly what's shared in the breakout groups, which we will not be recording. We'll be recording other parts of it. A few administrative notes. As I just said, we will be recording portions of the program when we are together in the large group tonight. So if you do not want to be in the recording when we're in the large group, turn off your camera. We'll also be going into breakout groups based on congregational size, as we mentioned, with your Congregations Mid-America staff primary contact, serving as the facilitator for your group. So if you haven't done so already, please follow the link in the chat for instructions on how to determine and indicate what group you belong in. It looks like many of you have done that, but not all of you. So it'd be great if you would do that for us, please. Thank you and welcome. We are glad you are here with us on this evening. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Chelsea.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chelsea Krafka. I am a middle-aged, light-skinned woman of mixed race with long brown hair, hoop earrings, black cardigan today. I'm the administrator for the Mid-America region. I'm also a primary contact for some of our small congregations. Your other Mid-America staff will introduce themselves throughout the program, but I want to lift up and thank Chanel Gomez from the events team for serving as our tech host tonight.
We're soon going to be heading out into our breakout groups, but first, please take a moment to reflect and let us know about trends and themes that you're noticing in your congregation.
Thank you. So welcome back, everyone. I always feel that time together in the breakout groups in a session like this feels like it should be more. And as we move forward in time. So everyone, welcome. My name is the Reverend David Pyle. I am the regional lead for the Mid-America region and the content presenter for our congregational board members gathering this year. I use he, him pronouns. I am a light-skinned, white-identified, cisgendered man in my early 50s with blue eyes, and light brown, it could be blue hair, but light brownish, more grayish hair. And I am in my home office in a little town called Oak Grove in southwestern Kentucky. It's good to be with you all. And I wanted to thank everyone for us letting us or being coming back after we had to cancel the December gathering because I fell on ice on military duty and did some things to my leg that are in process of healing, and healing is going well. But at the time we were supposed to do this program last month, I was on opioid painkillers and about a 9 or a 10 on the pain scale. So it would have been a very different presentation than what we're going to do now. So it's good to be with you all as we're talking about who are the stakeholders that a congregation has, that who are the people that are invested in a congregation, and how does the board maintain the relationship with those that the congregation serves. So before we move into that, just a little bit for those that are new to the program series this year. Each month, we're going to explore a different topic of board leadership, with this month focus being the relationships that the board holds with stakeholders. Some of the topics will be kind of the whole board responsibilities, and some of them will be individual board member responsibilities, but we will explore one of these together every month. Each time there'll be a time for a short presentation by me and with group discussion by congregational size. And most of this material can be found in the Board Basics course or the Board Foundations course on the UUA Leader Lab and the portal. And you can also take the UU course titled UU Board Foundations. And the UU Board Foundations will get more into individual board member skills than we're doing in this program on these evenings. So, and all the links for those will be something that we add into the chat near the end of the program tonight. So just know that you can access those resources. So one of the things that I usually begin to think about is that boards have responsibilities for some things that they're not actually the ones doing. Sometimes they are the ones doing it, but the board responsibility is often to make sure that someone in the congregational system is responsible for doing the thing. As we had a session earlier this fall on one of the ways the board does that is by creating good policy. And for those of you that were with us for the policy session, all the previous sessions are recorded and on the Mid-America website, UUA.org website. But one of the responsibilities that the board can't delegate to anyone else is that under nonprofit law for I think every state in the United States, though we have uh, a theological and ecclesiological is thinking about church, a theological and ecclesiological commitment that it is the congregational meeting, it is the congregation when they're gathered together that is the full body of the congregation. But no state under their nonprofit law is going to try and maintain relationship with an entire congregation's gathered congregational meeting. And so it is the board of trustees, the governing board, that is the relationship holder with the state. It is the relationship holder with the state secretary of state's office, or in some cases, there are other organizations that the state has. So one of the first primary relationships that the board under nonprofit law holds is that relationship with the state. And Mid-America Region is a nonprofit, separate but interconnected with the UUA. And there are things that we have to do every year through our board of trustees to be able to maintain relationship with the state of Iowa, which is where we are incorporated. And the same thing is true for congregational boards. So that is I begin with that because it is one of the primary legal relationships that the board holds. But the congregational board, is also the primary holder of the relationship with the Unitarian Universalist Association. It's not the minister and the staff. Matter of fact, we as congregation life staff, we primarily work with ministers and the staff because you employed them, not because of them inherently being religious professionals, because they are often as your primary contact, who is here with us, with the exception of Lauren this evening. Our primary relationship is to the congregation's board, and so boards have a responsibility that we hope we encourage to maintain that relationship with us as we are trying to maintain it with you. And also, boards have a primary responsibility to maintain the relationship with other congregations, not just UU congregations, but other congregations in the area. I mean, one of the things that's been most heartening to me in this last week or so has been the ways that all the work that the congregations and the congregations boards did in the Twin Cities and Minneapolis are playing out right now, because those congregations have been very proactive in building relationship with each other, in responding to the ICE actions that have happened in the city of Minneapolis. Those congregations have come together because those relationships were already built. The staff and the boards had already built trusting relationships between the UU congregations and with other congregations of other faith traditions in their area. And while a congregational board, while staff may live some of that, the board has the responsibility to make sure that our congregations are not acting alone. In practice, as we said, many of the congregational boards delegate the holding of key relationships to staff, and that makes sense at one level because they're paid. They often have ways to build relationship with each other. There is a fragility that comes from it, though, because hopefully your congregation survives the ministry of any individual staff member. Hopefully I used to say the congregations that I served, was my goal was that you all still exist when I leave. Right? And so the board has a response. Then the board is one of the natural places where those responsibilities may flow to when there is a ministerial transition or transition in other staff, the relationships with other congregations, the relationships with the UUA. Just know that the board becomes the place where those relationships rest over the long term. So, how do you think through what are the relationships that that are important to your congregation? The board may not maintain all of these, but I think it is a board responsibility as part of understanding your mission to give some real thought to what are the relationships of our congregation, the key relationships that are most important to us. Who are the stakeholders that we are invested in and that are invested in our congregation's mission and our vision and our values? So, internal to the congregation, who has a governance responsibility within the congregation? And under our polity, under congregational polity, every single member of the congregation has a governance responsibility under by being a member of the congregation. But I know that every congregation I ever served, the actual community of the congregation was far larger than those that were members. That there was also uh, many others besides those who had the governance responsibility, who were members, who could vote at the annual meeting. There were friends of the congregation. There were people who participated in our programs but were not themselves members. There were people who would go out with us to work for justice, but did not identify as Unitarian Universalists themselves. There is a broad understanding of who the internal stakeholders to a congregation are, those who participate in and are supported by the congregation's programs. But it's also those whose leadership, support, and volunteerism the congregation depends upon to fulfill the missions. And that's another stakeholder group. Now, some of them are the exact same people, right? A lot of them are. The rule of thumb in congregational consulting work is that 20% of a congregation's members do 80 to 90% of the work of the congregation. And it's that 20% that we're talking to. I am willing to bet that most of you, by taking a Wednesday night and coming to a congregational board members gathering event, are probably in that 20% of people that do more 80 to 90% of the work of the congregation. But knowing that the board looking at that group as a key stakeholder group of a level of investment that the boards of the board can draw from and can pay attention to. And also, another question the board asks internally is whose voice is not actively centered? Because congregations have natural flows about whose voice gets listened to, whose voice becomes part of the community. And asking the question in our in our community, in our internal community, whose voice are we, the board, not hearing from? Whose voice is not included? And how can we bring that voice into the melody that is our congregation? Externally, some of the questions I ask boards to consider for who your key stakeholders are is who are our partners in bringing our shared values into the world. I know that in one congregation I served in California, one of our key partners was the Salvation Army, with all the complexity that that meant, with our different theologies and our different views of the world. And we did a lot of work to maintain that key stakeholder relationship because it was part of our values to end homelessness in the town and county that we served. And the Salvation Army was one of our best partners. So who are those partners? Who has resources that we can access to fulfill our mission, right? Where are there resources that are external to our congregations? Financial, community resources, resources of leadership and volunteerism that can be accessed to help fulfill our mission. Who is invested in our mission? It's amazing to me that there are lots of people out there who are invested in the success of us bringing about the beloved community in the world, who don't see themselves as Unitarian Universalism and yet as Unitarian Universalists, and yet are deeply committed and can be part of the stakeholder group beyond the walls of a particular congregational community. And what organizations and groups can we empower? Our congregations have the ability to sometimes give validity to empower a group to use our space that shares our values, that may be operating in a different mission, but shares our values and ideals. How can we empower those groups? And one of the questions I just want to do this section in a larger workshop, a longer workshop, is I ask congregational leaders to write a list. Who would miss us if our congregation was no longer here? Who in our community would miss us? And that probably tells you who is a good shorthand to who is a stakeholder in your congregation's mission from beyond the community of the congregation's immediate membership. So the I said this a few minutes ago. I'm going to do this like quickly. We really is the question of who is a stakeholder, who are your stakeholders, is who has a vested interest in the congregation's mission. And what can your congregation have a vested interest in? What groups, what organizations can you help to serve, support, and amplify? And who can we partner with to bring about the success not only of the congregation's mission, but bringing our values of love, equity, transformation, justice into the wider world? These are the kinds of conversations. This is deep board work, is doing this regular assessment about who can we be in relationship with, who do we serve, and who can we empower. So what I want you to do for a second with me, if you would, is just think for a minute. And in the chat, I think the chat is open for people. In the chat, write in a couple of stakeholders of your congregation. They could be internal stakeholders to your congregation. They could be external, but just a couple of stakeholders. Well, it could be a group, it could be an individual, it could be a conception of a group. Who are some stakeholders that are invested in your congregation? And we'll take a look as they come in. Local interfaith group, Congregations United to Serve Humanity, the local Democratic Party, a local elementary school, AA groups that meet at our church, a local soup kitchen, social justice task forces. Our small downtown area is a stakeholder. We are part of the historic district of downtown, local homeschool groups, PFLAG. Our state action network, our landlord, Havas Jewish Congregation, a Havas Jewish Congregation. Several nonprofits that work with the social justice that we share the plate with, various nonprofit groups. We're going to continue to share these. But what I want to say is that when we conceive of who our congregations serve and who the mission, it's much broader than the congregational membership. And at the same time, we also recognize the different groups within our congregational membership and the board's ability to listen and draw those groups in. Please continue to share them in the chat and take a look at those. So usually at this point in a workshop, people start feeling overwhelmed. And what I want to say is, it's not the board's responsibility to maintain all of these relationships directly. Some yes, some no. The board delegates a lot of responsibility to different parts of the congregation and community. It's the board's responsibility to be regularly assessing what are the relationships we have, how are we maintaining them, and what are the relationships we need that we don't have right now? And how are we engaged with and how are we getting information from these key stakeholder relationships that our congregation relies upon and holds? So it is the board's work. There are some relationships, like the UUA staff, that the board does have a primary responsibility in maintaining and engaging with those relationships. But a lot of them, this board work is being the visionary, is thinking through who can we and do we need to be in relationship to live the mission of our congregation and our faith. And we will delegate many of these relationships to staff, to other leaders, to groups within the congregation. I said this one again. Last time I did this workshop, everybody was freaked out at this point, so I needed a second slide to make the same point. So, the uh, so we'll just move through that one. So I want to shift gears a little bit because I think all boards have a responsibility to be visionary about thinking about who are the stakeholders invested in our congregation, what are the relationships that we need, and how are we engaging in and maintaining those relationships, particularly during transitions of leaders and of staff. How is the board making sure that those relationships are maintained and whole? But there's also a thing that plays out here is that there are many different ways that boards understand what their role in the congregation is. One of the most clear polarities that I've seen is the polarity that I frame as the difference between representative boards and empowered boards. And let me frame how these play out in congregations. And like many polarities, this is uh, a binary that you find yourself on a spectrum between often. And it's funny that in a lot of governance work I do with congregations, governance transformation work, it's that the board may understand itself in one way and the congregation understands the board another way, and helping them to engage this. So the two of them are what I call representative boards. And these are boards who view themselves, and the congregation most often views them as their role is representing the interest of the congregation, that they are elected as a kind of efficiency, a way to be in a more efficient version of the congregational meeting. And so the boards do a lot of work to listen to the congregation members so that they are accurately representing as best they can the interests, the needs, the desires, the feeling of the congregation members. Um, this contrast this with another conception that boards have, and that is where the leaders, the congregational board, are leaders chosen to act in the best interest of the congregation based on their best understanding. So instead of assessing, surveying, understanding what the wide congregation wants, these leaders are elected and entrusted to make decisions in the best interest of the congregation. Do you see the difference between those two? They pay attention to the congregation members, but more for the purpose of being able to refine their own understanding of the congregation's mission and purpose than of representing directly the interests of congregation members. And they lead towards their understanding of the congregation's mission. The reason why I named these two different conceptions, and most boards find themselves somewhere in the space between, um, uh, uh, is that it changes the way you engage the data you receive from those key stakeholder relationships based upon how you understand what the board's role in the congregation is. So if you are more in the representative end, then your data, your key relationships and your data gathering from those relationships is so you can understand what you're trying to represent of the congregation as a whole. For the more empowered side, those the data that you're gathering, the key relationships, so that you can refine your understanding of the congregation's mission and its purpose, and lead as the congregation's elected spiritual religious leaders towards fulfillment of that mission and purpose. And I hinted at this a minute ago. A lot of times when I do governance transformation work, the key disconnect one of the key disconnects I find is a board that has made the transition to understanding itself as an empowered board, as leaders leading towards the mission, and congregation members who think that the board's role is to represent the congregation's interests, right? Um, so framing with that framing, I want us to move us into that both of these styles, and both these styles are valid, and they're both operative in our congregations, and they can be operative in different board members in the same board, right? Two different board members who have a different conception of what the purpose of the board is. Um, Representative boards will maintain the linkage for the purpose of knowing how to best represent the will of the congregation, the will, desires, and interests of the congregation. And empowered boards will engage with leaders, will engage with key stakeholders for the purpose of refining their understanding of the congregation's mission and purpose. Um, so in both of those understandings, however, some of the same techniques can be used. Um, One of the things when we were together over the last month, we were together in November, the last time we were together, we were discussing congregational mission and how the board understands and refines congregational mission, is we talked about a technique called powerful questions. And powerful questions are short questions that are able to cannot be answered with a single yes or no, or cannot be answered with data, but lead the board or others into deepening their understanding of the congregation's mission and purpose, and also their understanding of each other as board members. I think I probably gave the example of the congregation that worked for a while with the powerful question, who would we be if we did not have this building? And vision together. Well, one of the things that that congregation did was they took that powerful question of who would we be if we did not have this building, and they held cottage meetings that the board brought groups of 10 to 15 members of the congregation together over dessert at somebody's house, dessert and coffee, and asked that question of different groups, different gathered collection of congregation members and stakeholders and listened. And this does two things. One, it gives the board greater data, and understanding of the congregation, helps the board refine its own understanding of the mission, but it also helps people feel really deeply listened to by the board in a hosted community setting. Another one that I saw that I loved, and I forgot an E on coffee. Another one that I love is there's a technique called World Cafe, and it's very simple. It's that during something like coffee hour, you put butcher block white paper out on tables and crayons and markers and things like that, and you write that question that you want people to engage with on the center of the of the butcher block on the table, and people wander around and they write their response to whatever that question is. For the congregation that I mentioned before, they did this, and people wrote down visions of who the congregation would be if they no longer had their building on this table. And one of the beautiful things of this is not just that it's an efficient social community way to gather this kind of feedback, but everybody also reads what everybody else wrote. Right? And it's a way for people to feel as a community and to see that maybe their vision isn't the same as the vision of someone else. And no one writes their name on it. So everyone gets a feel for the diversity within the congregation. There's also direct small group engagement with congregational lay leaders, donors, and volunteers. I highly recommend that boards have some understanding of who your key leaders are. Some of those leaders are people that are in leadership roles, like committee chairs or team leads. Some of them are volunteers, and some of them may even be donors. But identify who the key leaders are in your congregation, and then make a plan as a board how you can have one-on-one conversations with those key leaders through the year. Maybe pull them aside in coffee hour, or take them out for lunch, or even just call them on the phone, although that seems to be blasé now, and just have some regular conversations. I know one of the most powerful things I did when I was in parish ministry was I wrote a thank you note to about 15 leaders in the congregation every month. And that thank you note would then have them come into my office and have conversations with me based in gratitude. And practices like that can deepen a board's key relationships within a congregation. And of course, then regular board participation in the life of the congregation. One of the things that I do when I am working with the board is I ask how often they go to church and see if how engaged the board is in the active life of the congregation. In doing those conversations and doing those engagement with relationships, one of the things that board members have to be careful with is that when they are in that role, when you're talking to a leader that you've taken out for coffee, or you're engaging with a local community group that your congregation is in relationship with, that you do those conversations not from the perspective of you as an individual, but from your perspective as a board member, representing the congregation, in fact, in a form of public ministry. That there's a difference between me, David, having a relationship with a friend, versus who happens to be in the Mid-America region, versus me, the regional lead, calling them to hear about their values, their hopes, their dreams for our faith and for our religious community. It is really a practice of, and part of that is realizing when you're in that role, when you've invited someone into that key stakeholder relationship, that you're sharing from the perspective of the entire board, not just your own, right? And you're listening from the perspective of the entire board, and to bring that back. The So we learned a bunch of stuff, and I love doing these in 30 minutes, and because it's me putting a bunch of ideas out there, and then you all get to go talk about them for a little while. Um, what the board learns through all the conversations, through doing World Cafe, through cottage meetings, through board engagement sessions where board members sit at a table in coffee hour and everybody looks at them strangely. No, people come over and share their deepest values. The What do you learn with it? Uh, some of it is fodder for the board's continued development of your understanding of the congregation's mission and purpose. Some of it might lead the board to realize that there's a need for a new policy or procedure, or that there's a fiduciary concern. Maybe we need to think through whether we are utilizing our assets and resources as appropriately as we could. Some of it might lead towards some new directions in planning for the future when the board gets into its next round of strategic planning or work together. And some may point out some key stakeholder relationships that you don't have, that you could use, or that could use some attention. Um, but it's one of the most important uses of all of those relational conversations is next month's session, which is going to be on congregational assessment. That is assessing where we are so we know where we can go. If there's a thing that congregations struggle with more than anything else, it's assessing how well we are doing. And so we're going to spend some time next month talking about ways that a board can do some good look at our ministries and whether they are fulfilling and leading us towards the fulfillment of our mission to bring justice, equity, compassion, and human relations into the wider world. And so I look forward to seeing you all come back. It's always wonderful when people come back to a second or third or fourth workshop from me. The first one you didn't know what you were going to get. So with that, I want to before I hand it back, we're going to name that there are some additional trainings. The links, Chanel just put them in the chat, that are also designed for deeper board development. Some of them are individual trainings, such as the Board Foundations course and the UUA Congregational Board Member training, and some of them are trainings for the whole board. The Strategic UU Board is a wonderful training program for whole congregational boards to engage with. And with that, thank you. I will take us off share screen, and I believe, and my thing just told me I did 30 minutes. Look at that. Oh, now it's trying to share screen, not take us off share screen. That's bad. Stop share. There we go.
Thanks, David. Everyone, my name is the Reverend Sharon Dittmar, and I am a primary contact for our program-sized congregations. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I am a late middle-aged white woman with teal glasses, long hair, and I had to go put on a wool sweater when David was talking because it got very cold in here. So thank you for that wonderful presentation, David. I think our boards are so hungry for this information. What we're going to do now is go back into breakout groups, and we're going to have a half an hour, actually 27 minutes there. And we're going to consider these two questions, all right? They are, what stood out for you from the presentation on the board's relationship with the congregations? Oh,
I didn't update that. So it should be what stood out for you on the board's relationship with maintaining key stakeholder relationships.
All right. Do you have another question, David, then? Because that's one.
And the second is, are there any key relationships that you haven't thought of before that you thought of that your congregation could be maintaining? My apologies for not updating that in this.
My name is Kiana Dene. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm an African American woman with there's colorful glasses with gold little boxes on them. I have locks, you may or may not see them, and I have on a silver medallion that's a moose. Because I love me some mooses this year. And I'm in Ann Arbor where it's 17 and it feels like 3. Good times, good times. So I'm so glad we've got to spend this time together. As we come back from our breakout groups, I invite your primary contact to share one takeaway from your group discussion. And so we will start with our friends. How about David and Sharon? Were you guys together today as a group?
It was just me.
Just
Oh,
Sharon.
Sharon then.
So I will start with one takeaway and one question for David Pyle. My takeaway from the group, reporting from them, is two of them were really like, should we be in deeper relationships with congregations who organize for justice so that we know and trust one another when we are called to justice work? That really came up deeply. And David Pyle, have you shared with this group yet your idea of a good agenda, which begins with an open question? Or is that coming
We
later?
have not done the consent agenda with well, we did do the doing the open question at the beginning of a meeting, so doing some stuff in your agenda to make sure that you begin. That was sometime in, I think that might have actually been November. That the board members to do some work in how you meet so that you have the time for a powerful question at the beginning of every board meeting where you spend 30 to 40 minutes of every board meeting engaging some question that lets you know more about each other, about the congregation's mission, and about which you're going to make no decision in the rest of that meeting. So I think that's in the November meeting. People can go back and look at that video.
Before the next answer to the question, though, I do want to remind folks, if you feel so moved, we also invite you to share in the chat any learnings that you're taking away from our time together this evening. And I think, is it just the smalls that are left? Or, oh, Matthew.
Yeah, our pastoral size congregations. We had a great conversation, and one thing we talked about was the very reality of like formal and informal, and it's often the case that there's a external partnership, that there's a person in the congregation or a couple of people who are really passionate about it. How does the board relate to that person to support that partnership? And how much is it incidental or core to the work? So that was a good conversation, just describing the reality of how this sort of works in practice. And then we heard about, the listening model that's very popular in community organizing models like Gamaliel and IAF, and talked about the power of that deep listening, both with internal and external stakeholders, to really know what's happening. And someone described that experience with someone they knew well, and they learned new things, right? And so if you're part of a community organizing, you have that tool, but even if you're not, you can use that to find out really what do your stakeholders and your relationships, what do they really care about? And what are their lives really like? And what do they really need? And how can you be connected?
Mm, thank you. In our small group, we had there was only two great, amazing, small but mighty leaders. And one of the things that they shared is after we got through all the questions, I asked what was a relationship either inside the church or a relationship, a larger institution to institution relationship that they appreciate. And they both shared those stories. And then I suggested that they send thank you notes to those folks for that relationship. And part of that sharing was to say if we cultivate the muscle of gratitude and stewardship of a relationship with people we already really love, when it's time to steward the relationship with folks who we are building a relationship with, that muscle will already been used a little bit. So it's just an offering to think like, who is a partner you already have who really helps you in your work, and really start to think about how you treat that relationship and steward it so you can take that muscle into new expanded places. And then actually, yes, so there's that. All right. Is there any other sharings that feel like they need to come into the space? All right. I wanted to be sure, give folks time to think. Well, I want to thank you for attending this evening. I want to thank David for centering us in the board's shared understanding of board linkage. We will notify you by email when the board when this recording is posted. I'm sorry. In case you want to share it with other members of your board, these are really great things that you guys can watch offline and use as discussion points when you guys get back together. And we hope to see you back next month on February 11th, where we will explore how boards can assess how well the congregation is fulfilling their mission. In addition to this monthly gathering, we invite you to check out other opportunities and programs on our website. I feel like singing. So go now in peace, go now in peace. And may the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go.